was injured, handcuffed to a restraining chair, and tased. He was left untended, and he died. For his family, the cause of Matthew's death remains a mystery, but it should not be.
21-year-old Matthew Ajibade was arrested January 1st of this year by Savannah, Georgia cops. They found him in a residence holding a woman under a blanket. Her face was bruised, her nose was bleeding. Police say he resisted arrest in a violent manner. They took him to jail where officials say he had to be restrained and in the process injured 3 officers. During a bed check, they found him unresponsive. Pronounced dead, the investigation later showed he died of blunt force trauma, meaning he allegedly was beaten to death. 9 deputies were fired in connection with this death, and now the coroner has ruled it a homicide. Thus begins the search for answers. Let's welcome to Midpoint the attorney for his family, veteran defender Mark O'Mara. Mark, thank you so much for joining us today.
Sure, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. Why the delay? What are they trying to hide?
You know, they must be trying to hide a lot. It's absurd to me that 5 months into it, more than 5 months into it, and we have to find out about a cause of death off the internet because that the sheriff, the district attorney, the county don't have the decency to allow the family some semblance of closure in how and why Matthew died.
Now, we need to bring into this as well that he apparently was on some sort of medication at the time, correct?
That's correct. He actually had 3 years prior to this event and his death, he was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. His girlfriend called the cops, or called 911 to have them come. She wanted him to get to the hospital. He was in what's called a bipolar or manic swing. And when the police got there, she even told him, get him to the hospital, told him of the disorder, and even went back into the house and got them the medication, which is documented as bipolar medication.
Mark, I'm going to play devil's advocate here on this for a moment because the girlfriend tells him that he's suffering a manic swing. They've just gotten to the residence here and they find that she has been allegedly assaulted by him. She tells them something. They have him out. They don't know whether to believe her or not. They don't know whether to believe that the medication is actually real for what he is suffering from. They take him to jail. There's some sort of an altercation there. The entire time, again, playing that devil's advocate, they don't know what he is suffering from. Isn't it fair to say that that needs to be taken into consideration here?
I'm very okay with that. You know, it's frustrating to me that the cops are so poorly trained, at least there in Savannah, that they don't know how to diagnose mental illness themselves. I mean, let's look at it. I would not want to be a cop for fear of getting shot every day that I start my job. But if we're going to have well-trained, and we should have well-paid cops, they also should know how to diagnose a situation. And if it's a mental health illness, they should be trained in that. So we can go with devil's advocate, but this isn't just something thought up afterwards. This is a well-diagnosed illness, documented well in time before, and most important to me, we had the medication. But let's go ahead with the devil's advocacy and say they really weren't aware of it. Even if that's true, once Matthew was in their care and custody, they have an obligation, like any other citizen accused, to treat him fairly. What they don't have the right to do, no matter how he was acting, was to tase him the way they did, restrain him, probably tase him again, beat him so much so that finally we get a diagnosis from the medical examiner of blunt force trauma homicide, and then ignore him long enough where he dies in a restraining chair, unmonitored by law enforcement. From start to finish, there was an absolute failure of law enforcement, and it led to his unnecessary death.
You are completely right. Because when you're in custody, you still are supposed to receive at least a manner of respect from the officers that are there. Is this case then opening up a larger Pandora's box around the country? We talk about cops and how they deal with people. We see what's happened in Texas. But what happens behind the walls of these various holding facilities and these jails themselves, this is something that needs to be looked at because far too often things like this happen and we have no evidence as to what actually occurred.
Well, there's a silver lining to Matthew's death, as there is to many of the cases that have now come to the forefront, and I've been talking about a lot of them, obviously, and that is that we're using cell phone cameras and we're using videotape information to find out exactly what happened. We know that when cops use body cameras, they treat citizens accused better. We also know that the citizens who interact with them act better. So it's a win-win for everybody, and even more so, it's a win for the system because when body cameras are involved in an arrest, there's a higher percentage of those people who plead guilty to whatever they're being charged with, and they keep them out of the system. That to the side, it does really, like you say, open up a Pandora's box, because what's happening is We're having cops who are woefully undertrained and woefully underpaid, and we are now holding law enforcement officers, the people who are charged with keeping us safe from each other. That's what they do. We're holding them to such a high standard, and I'm okay with that, but we're going to have to pay them. We're going to have to train them. We can't give them $25,000, $30,000 a year, give them 6 or 8 weeks worth of training, and then hold them to the extraordinarily high standard of dealing with traumatic circumstances under difficult circumstances and acting absolutely appropriately. Matthew's case is far on the other side, or the other extreme. They did nothing right with him, it seems, and did absolutely everything wrong. The worst thing was they beat him to death and then left him to die.
There you go. We're all out of time, unfortunately. Mark, thank you so much for this. We will stay in touch. We will follow this case. Stay with us because Midpoint continues.
Thanks very much for the attention.